What would you do if you accidentally recorded the most powerful person in your world confessing to a crime that could destroy everything you know? For Charlotte Matthews, a young palace communications aide, this wasn't a hypothetical question. It was her terrifying reality. In the shadowed corridors of power, where whispered conversations can topple governments and a single recording can change history, Charlotte found herself holding the most dangerous piece of evidence imaginable. She never meant to capture it. She never wanted the responsibility. But when fate placed a smoking gun in her hands, she faced an impossible choice: stay silent and live safely, or speak truth to power and risk everything. This is the true story of how one woman's accidental discovery brought down a monarchy's carefully constructed lies, and how William Seals, the palace's ruthless security chief, would stop at nothing to bury the truth. It's a story of modern-day palace intrigue where smartphones become weapons, loyalty becomes currency, and silence becomes complicity. What Charlotte recorded that night would shake the foundations of the British crown. What happened next would test the very limits of courage, justice, and survival in the digital age. The truth has a way of surfacing, no matter how deep you try to bury it. Charlotte Matthews never imagined that staying late to finish a press release would change her life forever. The 28-year-old communications aide had been working at Buckingham Palace for 3 years, long enough to know the rhythms of royal life, but not long enough to become cynical about it. She genuinely believed in the institution she served, proud to be part of something larger than herself. On that cold February evening, Charlotte sat in her small office on the second floor of the East Wing, typing away at her laptop. The palace had emptied hours ago, leaving only the skeleton crew of security guards and the occasional cleaning staff member pushing their carts through the dimly lit corridors. She preferred working late when possible. The quiet allowed her to concentrate, and she enjoyed the sense of having this historic building almost to herself. Charlotte had always been meticulous about her work. Growing up in a middle-class family in Yorkshire, she understood the value of hard work and attention to detail. Her parents, both teachers, had instilled in her a deep respect for truth and accuracy. These qualities had served her well in her role, where even the smallest error in a royal statement could create international headlines. Tonight, she was putting the finishing touches on a statement about the prince's upcoming charity visit to Bangladesh. The trip had been months in the planning, and Charlotte wanted every word to be perfect. She had interviewed the prince's private secretary earlier that week, taken extensive notes, and cross-referenced every fact. This was exactly the kind of meaningful work she had hoped for when she applied for the position. Her phone, sitting beside her laptop, had been recording their conversation from Tuesday. She often recorded interviews for accuracy, a practice she had learned in journalism school before switching to communications. It was a habit that had saved her from several potential mistakes over the years. She had been meaning to delete the recording once the statement was complete, as was her usual practice. As Charlotte worked, she could hear footsteps echoing in the corridor outside her office, the cleaning staff, she assumed, making their rounds. The palace at night was full of sounds that seemed amplified in the emptiness. Pipes creaking, floorboards settling, the distant hum of heating systems working to keep the massive building warm. She paused in her typing to stretch her fingers and check the time. Nearly 11 o'clock. She would finish this paragraph and then head home to a small flat in South London. Tomorrow would bring another busy day of media inquiries and statement preparations. The footsteps in the corridor grew louder and then stopped. Charlotte looked up from her screen, listening. Sometimes the security guards would check on late working staff, ensuring everyone was safe and accounted for. She waited for a knock on her door, but it never came. Instead, she heard voices. Low, urgent voices, speaking just outside her office. The words were indistinct through the heavy wooden door, but the tone was serious, almost conspiratorial. Charlotte frowned, wondering who would be having such an intense conversation in the corridor at this hour. Her curiosity got the better of her. She quietly pushed back her chair and tiptoed to the door, pressing her ear against the wood. The voices were clearer now, and what she heard made her blood run cold. "The Bangladesh situation is more complicated than we've let on," a familiar voice was saying. Charlotte recognized it immediately as Prince Edward, the Duke of Sussex. "The charity isn't what it appears to be. We've known for months that the money isn't going where it's supposed to go." "That's precisely why we need to be careful about this visit," another voice responded. This one belonged to Lord Pemberton, the Prince's senior advisor. "If the press gets wind of the financial irregularities, the scandal will be enormous." Charlotte's hand flew to her mouth. Financial irregularities? The charity she had been writing about in glowing terms was involved in some kind of scandal? She pressed closer to the door, straining to hear every word. "How much are we talking about?" Prince Edward asked. "Nearly £2 million over the past 18 months, Lord Pemberton replied. "Money that was supposed to build schools and hospitals. Instead, it's been diverted to personal accounts, shell companies, offshore holdings. The whole operation is corrupt from top to bottom." "And we've known about this for how long?" "Since October. We received the audit report then, but William felt it was better to keep quiet until after the visit. He thought we could manage the situation more effectively, from a position of engagement rather than withdrawal." Charlotte felt her knees go weak. William Seals was the palace's chief security advisor, a man whose influence extended far beyond his official title. He was known for his ability to handle delicate situations with ruthless efficiency. The idea that he had known about charity corruption and chosen to cover it up was staggering. "So we're going ahead with a visit to a corrupt charity, knowing that we're essentially endorsing fraud," Prince Edward said, his voice heavy with what sounded like disgust. "William's position is that we can do more good by staying engaged and working to reform the organization from within," Lord Pemberton explained. "He's also concerned about the reputational damage if we suddenly withdraw support without explanation." "Reputational damage," the prince repeated bitterly. "What about the reputational damage when this inevitably comes out? What about the people who are suffering because money meant for their schools and hospitals has been stolen?" Charlotte realized her phone was still recording. In her shock, she had forgotten about the app that was still running from her earlier work session. She glanced at the screen and saw that it had been capturing audio for the past several minutes. "We have contingency plans," Lord Pemberton continued. "If the story breaks, we can claim ignorance. Say that we trusted the charity's financial reports and are shocked to learn of any irregularities. William has prepared a complete communication strategy." "A communication strategy built on lies," Prince Edward said. "Built on protecting the crown," Lord Pemberton corrected firmly. "Sometimes protecting the institution requires difficult choices." Charlotte heard footsteps approaching and panicked. She quickly moved away from the door and back to her desk, trying to look natural as she pretended to work on her laptop. Her heart was pounding so loudly she was sure anyone entering the room would hear it. The footsteps passed by her door without stopping. She waited several minutes before returning to listen, but the conversation had ended. The corridor was silent again, except for the usual creaks and hums of the old building. Charlotte stared at her phone, realizing the magnitude of what she had just recorded. She had evidence of a cover-up involving charity fraud, a cover-up that went to the very top of the royal hierarchy. The visit she had been writing about in such positive terms was built on a foundation of lies and stolen money. She thought about the statement she had been preparing, full of praise for the charity's work and excitement about the prince's involvement. Every word now felt like poison in her mouth. How could she continue working on something that she now knew was fraudulent? But more troubling was the question of what to do with the recording. She had stumbled into possession of information that could cause a massive scandal. Information that William Seals and others clearly wanted to keep secret. Information that could cost her job, her reputation, and possibly her safety. Charlotte saved her work and closed her laptop with shaking hands. The statement about Bangladesh would have to wait. She needed time to think, to process what she had heard, to figure out what kind of person she really was when faced with an impossible choice. As she gathered her things and prepared to leave the office, Charlotte made a decision that would haunt her for weeks to come. Instead of deleting the recording as she normally would, she saved it to her phone's secure folder. She told herself it was just temporary, just until she could figure out what to do. She didn't know that by saving that recording, she had just painted a target on her back. She didn't know that William Seals had sources throughout the palace, people who reported on unusual behavior, late-night conversations, and changes in routine. She didn't know that her decision to preserve evidence of the truth would soon make her the most hunted woman in Britain. The palace corridors that had seemed so friendly and familiar just hours earlier now felt menacing as Charlotte made her way to the exit. Every shadow could hide a threat. Every security camera could be watching her. Every guard could be wondering why she looked so pale and shaken. As she stepped out into the cold London night, Charlotte pulled her coat tighter around her shoulders and tried to convince herself that everything would be all right. She would sleep on it, she told herself. In the morning, everything would seem clearer. She had no way of knowing that by morning, William Seals would already be taking steps to ensure that the truth she carried would never see the light of day. The game had begun, though Charlotte didn't yet realize she was playing it. The recording on her phone contained more than just evidence of corruption. It contained the power to bring down careers, destroy reputations, and shake the monarchy to its foundations. It also contained enough danger to make Charlotte Matthews the most wanted woman in the country for all the wrong reasons. As she walked through the empty streets toward the tube station, Charlotte Matthews remained blissfully unaware that her life had just changed forever. The truth she carried would soon make her a target, but it would also force her to discover reserves of courage she never knew she possessed. The battle for the truth was about to begin, and Charlotte would soon learn that in the world of palace politics, the most dangerous weapon isn't a sword or a gun. It's a smartphone with a recording app in the hands of someone brave enough to use it. Charlotte barely slept that night. Every time she closed her eyes, she heard Prince Edward's voice discussing charity fraud with the casual tone of someone ordering coffee. The weight of what she knew pressed down on her chest like a physical force, making it difficult to breathe normally. She arrived at work the next morning determined to act as if nothing had happened. The best strategy, she reasoned, was to maintain her normal routine while she figured out what to do with the information she possessed. She settled into her usual morning tasks, reviewing media coverage, preparing briefing notes, and responding to journalist inquiries. But everything felt different now. The press release about the Bangladesh charity visit sat on her desk like a landmine. How could she continue working on something that she knew was built on lies? Every positive word about the charity felt like participating in fraud. Around 10 o'clock, her supervisor, Margaret Thornfield, stopped by her desk. Margaret was a veteran palace communications officer, someone who had weathered numerous royal scandals and emerged with her reputation intact. She was known for her unflappable demeanor and her ability to spin even the most damaging stories into manageable public relations challenges. "Charlotte, how's the Bangladesh statement coming along?" Margaret asked, her tone casual but her eyes watchful. "Nearly finished," Charlotte replied, hoping her voice sounded normal. "I just need to verify a few more details about the charity's recent projects." Margaret nodded approvingly. "Excellent. This visit is particularly important to His Royal Highness. He's very passionate about the work this charity is doing." She paused, studying Charlotte's face. "You look tired, dear. Everything all right?" "Just stayed late last night to get ahead on some projects," Charlotte said quickly. "I'm fine." "Good. Well, don't overwork yourself. We need you sharp for the busy period ahead." Margaret started to leave, then turned back. "Oh, and Charlotte? If you need any background information about the charity, I have some excellent briefing materials. No need to reinvent the wheel by doing your own research." The comment struck Charlotte as odd. Margaret usually encouraged thorough research and fact-checking. Why would she discourage it now? Unless someone wanted to control what information Charlotte had access to. After Margaret left, Charlotte tried to focus on her other assignments, but her concentration was shattered. She found herself jumping at every unexpected sound, analyzing every casual conversation for hidden meaning. The palace that had once felt like a second home now felt like a surveillance state. During her lunch break, Charlotte walked to a small cafe several blocks away from the palace. She needed distance from the building's oppressive atmosphere and time to think clearly. As she sat with her coffee, she pulled out her phone and stared at the recording app. The file was still there, marked with yesterday's date and timestamp, 47 minutes of audio that could change everything. Charlotte put in her earbuds and listened to portions of the conversation again, hoping she had somehow misunderstood what she heard. But there was no ambiguity. Prince Edward and Lord Pemberton had discussed covering up charity fraud with cold calculation. They had talked about protecting the monarchy's reputation at the expense of truth and justice. They had revealed a level of cynicism that shattered Charlotte's idealistic view of the institution she served. What disturbed her most was how routine the conversation had sounded. This wasn't a one-time ethical lapse, but part of an ongoing pattern of behavior. How many other cover-ups had there been? How many other times had the truth been sacrificed to protect royal reputations? Charlotte realized she was at a crossroads. She could delete the recording and pretend she had never heard anything. She could continue her career, write favorable press releases about corrupt charities, and live comfortably with the knowledge that her work was built on lies. Many people would consider that the smart choice. Or she could do something with the information. But what? Going to the press seemed impossibly dangerous. The palace had lawyers' influence and the power to destroy her credibility. They could claim the recording was fake, or taken out of context, or that Charlotte was a disgruntled employee seeking attention. Her phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "We should talk. Meet me at the Tate Modern Cafe at 5 p.m. Come alone. A friend." Charlotte stared at the message, her blood running cold. How had someone gotten her personal number? Who knew she had information worth discussing? She considered ignoring the text, but curiosity and fear compelled her to respond. "Who is this?" The reply came quickly. "Someone who knows what you heard last night. Someone who can help." Charlotte's hand shook as she typed back. "I don't know what you're talking about. Charlotte, you were working late yesterday. You heard voices in the corridor. You recorded something you weren't supposed to record. You need help dealing with what you know." The specificity of the message made Charlotte's stomach lurch. Someone had been watching her, monitoring her movements, possibly listening to her conversations. The palace's security apparatus was more extensive than she had realized. She looked around the cafe nervously, wondering if she was being watched right now. The other customers seemed ordinary enough, but Charlotte had learned that nothing was as it appeared in her world. The elderly man reading a newspaper could be a surveillance operative. The young woman on her laptop could be monitoring Charlotte's phone communications. Charlotte paid for her coffee and walked back toward the palace, her mind racing. The text messages suggested that someone else knew about the recording, which meant her secret was already compromised. But it also meant she wasn't alone in this situation. Someone else understood the significance of what she had discovered. The afternoon passed in a haze of anxiety and distraction. Charlotte tried to work on routine tasks, but her mind kept drifting to the mysterious text messages and the meeting that had been proposed. Every time someone entered her office or called her name, she wondered if this was the moment when everything would fall apart. At 4:30, she gathered her things and left the palace early, claiming she had a dentist appointment. The lie came easily, which surprised her. Just 24 hours ago, she would never have considered deceiving her employers about anything. Now she was developing skills she never wanted to need. The Tate Modern was busy with afternoon visitors, providing excellent cover for a clandestine meeting. Charlotte found the cafe and ordered another coffee she didn't want, scanning the room for anyone who might be her mysterious contact. A woman approached her table at exactly 5 o'clock. She was in her 40s, professionally dressed, with the kind of confident bearing that suggested authority and competence. She sat down without invitation and extended her hand. "Charlotte, I'm Sarah Davidson." "Thank you for coming. I'm not sure why I'm here," Charlotte said carefully. "You're here because you accidentally recorded a conversation that certain people desperately want to keep secret. You're here because you're smart enough to realize that possessing that recording puts you in danger. And you're here because you still believe in doing the right thing." Sarah's directness was both reassuring and terrifying. Charlotte found herself nodding despite her better judgment. "How do you know about the recording?" "I have sources within the palace, good sources who believe that the truth matters more than protecting corrupt institutions." Sarah leaned forward, lowering her voice. "What you recorded isn't an isolated incident. It's part of a larger pattern of cover-ups and corruption that goes back years." "Who are you exactly?" "I'm an investigative journalist. I've been working on a story about financial irregularities in royal charities for the past 6 months. What you have could be the missing piece that makes the whole story publishable." Charlotte felt a mixture of relief and terror. Relief that someone else knew the truth and was working to expose it. Terror at the implications of going public with such explosive information. "I could lose my job," Charlotte said quietly. "You could lose much more than that if William Seals decides you're a threat that needs to be eliminated," Sarah replied grimly. "He's not just a security advisor, Charlotte. He's the palace's fixer, the man who makes problems disappear. And you've just become a very big problem." "What do you mean, eliminated?" "I mean that people who threaten the monarchy's carefully constructed image have a tendency to experience unfortunate accidents or sudden career changes, or personal scandals that destroy their credibility. William is very good at finding leverage over people and using it to control them." Charlotte thought about her student loans, her elderly parents who depended on her financially, her dreams of advancing her career. She had plenty of vulnerabilities that could be exploited. "What are you suggesting I do?" "I'm suggesting we work together. You provide the recording, I provide the platform to tell the story safely. We expose the corruption, protect your identity as much as possible, and try to create enough public pressure to force real changes. And if that doesn't work?" "If they come after me anyway?" Sarah was quiet for a moment, considering her words carefully. "Then at least we'll have tried to do the right thing. Sometimes that's all we can control." Charlotte stared at her coffee, watching the foam slowly dissolve. Everything in her life up to this point had been careful, planned, safe. She had followed the rules, worked hard, and trusted institutions to do the right thing. Now she was being asked to throw all of that away based on one overheard conversation. "I need time to think," she said finally. "Time is the one thing we don't have," Sarah replied. "Every day you wait increases the danger. William's people are already asking questions about your behavior yesterday." It won't take them long to figure out what you heard. As if to prove her point, Charlotte's phone buzzed with another text from the unknown number. You missed your chance to talk today. That was unwise. There won't be another opportunity. Charlotte showed the message to Sarah, whose expression darkened. That's not good. They know about our meeting, which means they're tracking your movements more closely than I hoped. Sarah stood up quickly. Charlotte, you need to make a decision tonight. Either delete that recording and hope they believe you're no longer a threat, or commit to exposing the truth and accept the risks that come with it.
How do I contact you? Sarah wrote a number on a napkin.
Memorize this and then destroy it. If you decide to move forward, call me tomorrow morning at exactly 9 o'clock. If I don't hear from you by then, I'll assume you've chosen to stay silent. She left without another word, disappearing into the crowd of museum visitors. Charlotte sat alone with her cold coffee and racing thoughts, acutely aware that her life had just become exponentially more complicated. As she walked home through the London evening, Charlotte felt the weight of the recording in her pocket like a physical burden. She had stumbled into possession of information that could shake the foundations of the British monarchy, but using that information would require a level of courage she wasn't sure she possessed. The truth had a price, and Charlotte was about to discover whether she was willing to pay it. Tomorrow would bring a choice that would define not just her career, but her character. She only hoped she would choose wisely. Charlotte spent the longest night of her life wrestling with her conscience. She paced her small flat, alternately picking up her phone to call Sarah Davidson and then setting it down again. The recording felt like a ticking bomb, dangerous to possess but potentially devastating if detonated. By morning, she had made her decision. She called Sarah at exactly 9 o'clock. I'll do it, Charlotte said without preamble when Sarah answered. Are you absolutely certain? Once we start down this path, there's no going back.
I'm certain.
People are suffering because money meant for schools and hospitals is being stolen. If I stay silent, I become part of the problem. Good. We need to move quickly, but carefully. William Seals is already suspicious of your behavior. We have to assume he's monitoring your communications and movements. Sarah outlined a plan for transferring the recording safely and protecting Charlotte's identity as much as possible. They would meet again that evening at a different location, using a series of counter-surveillance measures to avoid detection. Charlotte arrived at work that morning with a newfound sense of purpose, but also growing paranoia. Every interaction felt loaded with potential meaning. When Margaret Thornfield stopped by her desk again, Charlotte wondered if it was routine supervision or something more sinister. How's that Bangladesh statement coming along? Margaret asked, her tone exactly the same as the day before. Nearly finished, Charlotte replied, using the same words she had used yesterday. Wonderful. Lord Pemberton would like to review it this afternoon before it goes to final approval. Charlotte's stomach tightened. Lord Pemberton was one of the men she had heard discussing the charity fraud. Having him review her statement felt like walking into a trap. Of course, she said, hoping her voice sounded normal. After Margaret left, Charlotte realized she would need to complete the statement despite knowing it was built on lies. Refusing to finish it or expressing sudden concerns about the charity would raise suspicions. She had to maintain her cover while secretly working to expose the truth. She spent the morning crafting carefully worded paragraphs that technically told the truth while avoiding outright fraud. Instead of making specific claims about the charity's accomplishments, she focused on the prince's intentions and hopes for the visit. It was a delicate balance between doing her job and protecting her conscience. At lunchtime, Charlotte left the palace and walked to a nearby department store. Following Sarah's instructions, she purchased a cheap prepaid phone using cash and activated it in the store's bathroom. She then walked to a different location and called Sarah from the new number. The transfer point is confirmed for tonight, Sarah said. But I have troubling news. My sources tell me that William Seals has ordered a comprehensive security review of all palace staff. They're looking for anything unusual in recent behavior patterns. What kind of security review? Phone records, email monitoring, movement tracking through building security systems. They're particularly focused on anyone who was in the palace late on Tuesday night. Charlotte felt sick. There couldn't have been many people in the building when she overheard the conversation. It wouldn't take long for them to identify her as a person of interest. How long do we have? Maybe 24 hours before they zero in on you specifically? We need that recording tonight, and then we need to get the story published as quickly as possible. The afternoon passed in a blur of forced normalcy. Charlotte submitted the Bangladesh statement to Margaret, who forwarded it to Lord Pemberton for review. She answered routine emails, attended a staff meeting about upcoming events, and tried to act like someone who hadn't accidentally stumbled into the biggest story of her career. At 4 o'clock, Lord Pemberton himself appeared at her desk. He was a tall, distinguished man in his 60s, with the kind of aristocratic bearing that came from generations of privilege. Charlotte had met him only briefly before, usually in formal settings with many other staff members present. "Miss Matthews, I've reviewed your statement about the Bangladesh visit. Excellent work, very thorough and well written." "Thank you, sir. I particularly appreciated your focus on His Royal Highness's humanitarian goals, rather than getting bogged down in operational details about the charity itself. Sometimes the bigger picture is more important than minor administrative matters." The comment felt like a veiled threat. Was he telling her that she shouldn't ask too many questions about how the charity operated? Or was she reading sinister meaning into an innocent observation? "I believe in focusing on the positive impact of royal engagements," Charlotte replied carefully. "Quite right. That's exactly the kind of thinking we need in communications. People want to hear about hope and progress, not audit reports and financial technicalities." He smiled warmly, but Charlotte noticed that the expression didn't reach his eyes. He was studying her face, looking for something. "Doubt? Knowledge? Fear? I look forward to working with you on future projects, Miss Matthews. You show great promise." Then after he left, Charlotte sat frozen at her desk, replaying every word of the conversation. Lord Pemberton had definitely been probing, testing her reaction to subtle references to financial issues. The mention of audit reports was too specific to be coincidental. She forced herself to work for another hour, maintaining the pretense of normalcy. But inside, she was counting the minutes until she could escape the palace's increasingly oppressive atmosphere. At 6 o'clock, Charlotte left through the main gates and began an elaborate route designed to detect and lose any surveillance. She walked to Victoria Station, took a train to London Bridge, switched to the Underground, and then doubled back before finally making her way to the agreed meeting point in Greenwich. Sarah was waiting at a riverside pub, sitting alone at a corner table with a clear view of the entrance. She nodded almost imperceptibly when Charlotte arrived, then waited several minutes before approaching her. "You're clean," Sarah said, sliding into the booth across from Charlotte. "No one followed you here." Charlotte handed over the prepaid phone, which contained a copy of the recording she had transferred from her personal device. Sarah immediately removed the phone's battery and SIM card, placing them in a small, lead-lined pouch. "This will prevent remote access or tracking," she explained. "The recording is now secure." "What happens next?" "I upload this to a secure server and begin the verification process. I have audio experts who can confirm that it hasn't been altered or fabricated. I also need to corroborate some of the financial information mentioned in the conversation." "How long will that take?" 48 hours for the technical analysis. Another day or two to confirm the financial details. We should be ready to publish by early next week." Charlotte felt a mixture of relief and terror. She had crossed the point of no return, but at least she was no longer carrying the burden alone. "What should I do in the meantime?" "Act normal, do your job. Don't change any patterns that might trigger suspicion. And be very careful about electronic communications. Use only your personal phone and assume everything you say is being monitored." As they prepared to leave separately, Sarah gave Charlotte a final piece of advice. "Remember that you're doing the right thing. The people who are threatened by the truth will try to make you doubt that. They'll use fear, intimidation, and manipulation to make you regret your choice. Don't let them." Charlotte walked home alone, taking another circuitous route to ensure she wasn't followed. The recording was out of her hands now, but the danger was far from over. In fact, it was probably just beginning. The next morning brought confirmation that her fears were justified. Charlotte arrived at work to find William Seals himself waiting in her office. He was a compact, intense man in his 50s, with the kind of cold intelligence that made people nervous. His official title was Chief Security Advisor, but everyone knew his real job was protecting the monarchy from threats both internal and external. "Miss Matthews, I wonder if I might have a word with you," he said, his tone polite but unmistakably authoritative. "Of course, sir." William closed the office door and took a seat across from her desk. The gesture was casual, but Charlotte felt like she was being interrogated. "I'm conducting a routine security review of staff who had access to the palace on Tuesday evening. You were here quite late that night, I'm told." "Yes, sir. I was finishing the Bangladesh statement. Dedicated work. Admirable. Did you notice anything unusual during your time here? Anyone behaving strangely? Any conversations that seemed out of place?" The question was a test, and they both knew it. William was giving her an opportunity to reveal what she knew, but he was also giving her a chance to lie, which would make her vulnerable to blackmail later. "I was focused on my work," Charlotte replied. "I didn't really pay attention to what was happening elsewhere in the building." I see. And your work required you to record interviews, I believe? For accuracy purposes, Charlotte's blood ran cold. He knew about her recording habits, which meant he might know about Tuesday night's recording. Sometimes, yes, when I'm conducting complex interviews with multiple sources of information. Quite sensible. Technology can be so helpful these days. Of course, it can also be quite dangerous when misused. Recordings can be taken out of context, misunderstood, even manipulated to suggest things that never actually happened. The threat was clear. William was telling her that if she had recorded anything sensitive, it could be dismissed as fake or manipulated. He was also suggesting that using such recordings would be considered misuse of technology. I'm always careful to use technology responsibly, Charlotte said. I'm sure you are. You strike me as someone with good judgment and strong moral character. The kind of person who understands that loyalty to the institution is paramount. He stood to leave, then paused at the door. Miss Matthews, I hope you know that the palace takes very good care of staff members who demonstrate discretion and loyalty. Career advancement, financial security, personal protection when needed. We value our people highly. I appreciate that, sir. Good. And I hope you also understand that the palace has extensive resources for dealing with threats to its security and reputation. We're very effective at protecting ourselves and very thorough in investigating potential problems. After he left, Charlotte sat trembling at her desk. The message had been clear: cooperate and be rewarded, resist and be crushed. William Seals knew she was a potential threat, and he was offering her one last chance to step back from the brink. But it was too late. The recording was already in Sarah's hands, and the process of exposing the truth was already underway. Charlotte had chosen her side, and now she would have to live with the consequences. She only hoped she would survive them. The weekend passed in agonizing suspense. Charlotte tried to maintain normal routines, meeting friends for coffee and doing grocery shopping, but she felt like an actor playing a role. Every conversation felt forced, every smile felt fake. She found herself constantly checking over her shoulder and jumping at unexpected sounds. On Monday morning, Charlotte arrived at the palace to find her access card had been deactivated. The security guard at the staff entrance looked embarrassed as he delivered the news. I'm sorry, Miss Matthews, but you'll need to speak with Human Resources about your building access. There seems to be some kind of administrative issue. Charlotte's heart pounded as she made her way to the HR department. She knew this wasn't an administrative error. William Seals was tightening the noose, making her life difficult while he investigated her background and activities. The HR manager, Mrs. Chabba Whitfield, was apologetic but unhelpful. There's been a general security upgrade affecting several staff members. We need to verify employment details and conduct updated background checks. It should only take a few days. A few days? I can't do my job without building access. You can work from home on any projects that don't require palace resources. Margaret Thornfield has been informed and will coordinate with you on priority items. Charlotte left the building frustrated and frightened. Being cut off from the palace meant she couldn't maintain her cover of normalcy. It also meant William had more time to investigate her activities without worrying about what she might overhear. She called Sarah from a public phone booth, using a number they had established for emergencies. They've suspended my building access, Charlotte reported. That's concerning, but not unexpected. William is trying to isolate you while he gathers evidence. How are you holding up? Scared. I keep thinking I've made a terrible mistake. You did the right thing, Charlotte. The technical analysis of your recording is complete, and it's definitely authentic. The content is explosive. My financial sources have confirmed that the charity fraud is even worse than what you recorded. We're talking about systematic theft over several years, affecting multiple organizations. The scope of the corruption was staggering, but it also made Charlotte feel better about her decision. This wasn't just one conversation taken out of context. It was evidence of widespread criminal activity that needed to be exposed. When will you publish? Tomorrow morning. I wanted to give the palace an opportunity to comment, so I'll be sending them a list of questions this afternoon. Once I do that, all hell is going to break loose. What should I do? Stay safe. Stay away from your usual haunts. William's people are going to come after you hard once the story breaks. They'll try to discredit you, intimidate you, maybe even frame you for something. Charlotte felt sick. She had imagined professional consequences, but the possibility of being framed for a crime hadn't occurred to her. How can they frame me? Theft of confidential information, violation of official secrets acts, maybe even espionage if they're really creative. William has resources and connections you can't imagine. He can make evidence appear and disappear as needed. Then why did you encourage me to do this? Because sometimes doing the right thing requires taking risks. Because the truth matters more than personal safety. And because you're not as helpless as you think you are. Sarah gave Charlotte the address of a safe house where she could stay for a few days while the initial media storm played out. She also provided contact information for a lawyer who specialized in whistleblower protection. Remember, Charlotte, you're not a criminal. You're a hero who exposed corruption. Don't let them convince you otherwise. Charlotte spent Monday evening packing a small bag and preparing for what felt like going into hiding. She called her parents and told them she was taking a short vacation, unable to bear the thought of explaining the real situation. They would find out soon enough when the story broke. Tuesday morning, Charlotte was in the safe house when her phone exploded with notifications. Sarah's story had been published in The Guardian under the headline, "Screech Recording Reveals Royal Cover-Up of Charity Fraud." The article was comprehensive and devastating, laying out the evidence of corruption and the palace's knowledge of it. Within hours, the story had been picked up by every major news outlet in Britain and many international publications. The recording Charlotte had made was being played on television and radio stations across the country. The voices of Prince Edward and Lord Pemberton discussing charity fraud with casual indifference became the soundtrack of a royal scandal. The palace's initial response was predictable: denial, deflection, and character assassination. They claimed the recording had been taken out of context and suggested that Charlotte was a disgruntled employee seeking revenge for imagined grievances. William Seals held a press conference that afternoon, his performance a masterclass in controlled aggression. He stood behind a podium at Scotland Yard, flanked by senior police officers, and delivered a statement that chilled Charlotte to the bone. The individual responsible for this illegal recording has violated numerous laws regarding official secrets and breach of trust, he announced. We are working closely with police and security services to ensure that she faces the full consequences of her actions. This is not whistleblowing, this is theft of confidential information for personal gain. He went on to suggest that Charlotte had been recruited by foreign intelligence services to undermine the monarchy. The accusation was absurd, but delivered with such authority that some media outlets began treating it as credible. Charlotte watched the press conference from the safe house, feeling increasingly isolated and vulnerable. William was systematically destroying her reputation and painting her as a traitor rather than a truth-teller. But public reaction was more complicated than the palace had hoped. While some outlets echoed William's narrative, others focused on the content of the recording rather than the method of its acquisition. Social media exploded with outrage about charity fraud and praise for Charlotte's courage in exposing it. By Wednesday evening, Charlotte had become the most famous whistleblower in Britain. Protesters gathered outside Buckingham Palace demanding accountability for the charity scandal. Parliamentary leaders called for investigations. International media portrayed the revelation as evidence of systematic corruption within the British establishment. The pressure forced the palace to change tactics. Instead of pure denial, they began acknowledging concerns about charity oversight while maintaining that proper procedures had been followed. Prince Edward issued a statement expressing deep regret for any misunderstanding and announcing his withdrawal from the planned Bangladesh visit. But William Seals wasn't finished with Charlotte. On Thursday morning, police raided her apartment on suspicion of theft and breach of the Official Secrets Act. They seized her computers, phones, and personal documents, looking for evidence of criminal activity or foreign connections. Charlotte watched the news coverage from the safe house, feeling helpless as officers carried her possessions away in evidence bags. The raid was clearly intended as intimidation, designed to demonstrate the personal cost of challenging the establishment. Sarah called with mixed news. The raids are bad theatre, but they're also a sign of desperation. If William had real evidence against you, he wouldn't need such public displays. He's trying to scare you into fleeing the country or making some kind of statement that undermines your credibility. It's working. I am scared. That's normal. But look at what you've accomplished. 3 major charities have had their royal patronage suspended pending investigation. Parliament has announced a formal inquiry into charity oversight. The fraud you exposed has saved thousands of people from continued theft of money meant to help them. The conversation was interrupted by breaking news on television. Prince Edward had agreed to testify before the parliamentary inquiry, becoming the first senior royal to face formal questioning about alleged criminal activity in decades. You did that, Charlotte, Sarah said quietly. Your courage made that possible. Over the following days, the investigation expanded far beyond the original charity fraud. Other whistleblowers came forward with evidence of additional cover-ups and financial irregularities. The palace's carefully constructed image of moral authority crumbled as story after story emerged about institutional corruption. William Seals found himself increasingly isolated as even his allies began distancing themselves from the scandal. His heavy-handed tactics against Charlotte had backfired, generating sympathy for her and suspicion about what else the palace might be hiding. The turning point came when audio analysis experts confirmed that Charlotte's recording was not only authentic, but captured a longer conversation than had been initially reported. The additional content included even more damaging admissions about systematic fraud and cover-ups. Faced with overwhelming evidence and growing political pressure, the palace announced a comprehensive internal investigation, led by an independent prosecutor. William Seals was placed on administrative leave pending the outcome of multiple criminal investigations. But Charlotte knew that her personal safety remained uncertain. William might be sidelined officially, but he still had allies and resources that could be used against her. The game was far from over, and the most dangerous moves might still be ahead. As she prepared for what would likely be months of legal proceedings and public scrutiny, Charlotte reflected on the journey that had brought her to this point. A week ago, she had been an anonymous palace employee, focused on press releases and media management. Now, she was at the center of the biggest royal scandal in decades. She hadn't chosen this role, but she had chosen to honor it when circumstances demanded courage over comfort. The price had been higher than she imagined, but the alternative would have been living with the knowledge that her silence had enabled continued corruption and suffering. The truth had emerged, but justice remained to be achieved. Charlotte steeled herself for the battles ahead, knowing that the most dangerous opponent of all was still free and still determined to make her pay for her defiance.
3 weeks after the story broke, Charlotte found herself preparing to testify before a packed parliamentary committee room.
The venue had been chosen for maximum security and media access, with metal detectors, armed police, and camera crews creating an atmosphere more suited to a criminal trial than a parliamentary inquiry. Charlotte wore a simple navy suit, chosen to project competence and credibility without appearing to court publicity. She had spent days preparing with her legal team, reviewing every detail of her testimony and anticipating the attacks that would certainly come. The committee chair, Margaret Hastings MP, called the session to order with unusual formality. The weight of the moment was clear to everyone present. This was not routine parliamentary business, but a constitutional crisis that had shaken the monarchy to its foundations. Miss Matthews, you understand that you are here voluntarily and that you have legal representation present, the chair began.
You also understand that this committee has a duty to examine the circumstances surrounding the allegations of charity fraud and institutional cover-up that have emerged from your recording.
Yes, ma'am, I understand completely. The first questions came from sympathetic committee members, allowing Charlotte to tell her story clearly and establish the basic facts.
She described her role at the palace, her accidental recording of the conversation, and her difficult decision to share that recording with a journalist. At any point during this process, did anyone offer you money or other incentives to record private conversations? Asked David Chen MP. No, sir. I recorded that conversation entirely by accident. My phone was already recording from an earlier interview, and I forgot to turn it off. And after you realized what you had recorded, why didn't you simply delete it and forget about it? Charlotte had prepared for this question, but answering it still required her to summon the moral clarity that had driven her initial decision. Because what I heard described systematic theft of money meant to help some of the world's most vulnerable people. Because I heard senior officials discussing how to cover up that theft to protect their own reputations. I couldn't live with myself if I stayed silent while that continued. The questioning from opposition MPs was more supportive than Charlotte had expected. The scandal had created such public outrage that even conservative politicians felt compelled to criticize the palace's behavior. But then William Seals himself entered the committee room. Despite being on administrative leave, William had been granted permission to testify in his own defense. He moved through the room with the confident bearing of someone accustomed to controlling situations through force of will and superior information. William took his seat at the witness table with theatrical precision, arranging papers and adjusting his microphone as if preparing for a performance. When he looked up at the committee members, his expression conveyed polite cooperation, masking barely contained contempt. Ladies and gentlemen, he began without waiting for questions, I appear before you today to address serious allegations that have been made against the institution I have served faithfully for over 20 years. Before we proceed, I want to establish some context that has been missing from much of the media coverage surrounding this matter. The committee chair tried to interrupt, but William continued smoothly. Miss Matthews was not the dedicated public servant she has portrayed herself to be. She was a problematic employee who had been identified as a potential security risk weeks before this incident occurred. Charlotte felt her lawyer tense beside her. This was exactly the kind of character assassination they had anticipated. Our investigation into Miss Matthews' background revealed concerning associations with political activists, financial irregularities in her personal accounts, and patterns of behavior that suggested possible foreign influence. The accusations were outrageous, but William delivered them with such authority that several committee members looked genuinely concerned. Charlotte realized she was witnessing a master manipulator at work. Furthermore, William continued, the recording itself shows clear signs of digital manipulation. Audio experts employed by the palace have identified several anomalies that suggest selective editing and possible insertion of fabricated content. This was a lie, and Charlotte knew it. Independent experts had already confirmed the recording's authenticity, but William was banking on the committee's inability to adjudicate technical disputes in real time. Margaret Hastings finally managed to interrupt. Mr. Seals, these are serious allegations. Do you have documentary evidence to support these claims?
The full evidence package has been classified for national security reasons, but I can provide the committee with summary documents that outline our findings.
William's aide distributed folders to each committee member. Charlotte couldn't see the contents, but she watched the politicians' faces as they read. Several looked troubled, and she realized William was managing to plant seeds of doubt even among her supporters. Mr. Seals, interrupted James Morrison MP, one of Charlotte's strongest supporters on the committee. Are you alleging that Miss Matthews fabricated the voices of Prince Edward and Lord Pemberton in this recording? I'm saying that digital audio manipulation has become sophisticated enough that proving authenticity requires more than simple voice recognition. Without access to the original recording device and a complete chain of custody documentation, we cannot be certain about anything. It was a masterful deflection. William wasn't claiming outright fabrication, just raising enough technical doubts to undermine confidence in the recording's reliability. But then, Charlotte's lawyer stood up with a folder of his own. Mr. Chairman, if I may address Mr. Ivanovia, Seals' allegations directly? The committee chair nodded, and Charlotte's lawyer approached the witness table. Mr. Seals, you've made several serious accusations against my client. Are you aware that independent telecommunications experts have already confirmed that Miss Matthews' phone records show no contact with foreign nationals during the relevant time period? William's expression didn't change, but Charlotte noticed a slight tightening around his eyes. Are you further aware that the financial irregularities you mentioned consist entirely of student loan payments and routine family financial support, all of which are fully documented and legal? I stand by our intelligence assessment, William replied smoothly. And are you aware that the palace's own audio experts initially confirmed the authenticity of the recording before being instructed to find problems with it? This was news to Charlotte, and clearly news to William as well. For the first time, he looked genuinely surprised. I have no knowledge of any such initial analysis. Really? Because we have testimony from Dr. Charles Bays, Patricia Wells, the palace's senior audio technician, stating that she was ordered to reverse her initial findings after determining that the recording was authentic and unaltered. The room erupted as committee members demanded to hear from Dr. Wells. Immediately. William's careful narrative was unraveling in real time, undermined by his own staff's integrity. Margaret Hastings called for order. Mr. AP, Seals, did you or anyone under your authority instruct palace technical staff to alter their findings regarding this recording? I categorically deny any improper influence over technical analysis. Then you won't object to Dr. Wells testifying about her experience? William was trapped. Refusing would look like an admission of guilt, but allowing Dr. Wells to testify would expose his manipulation of evidence. Dr. Wells is welcome to share her professional opinions, though I would caution the committee that she may be acting under external pressure to contradict established palace findings. It was a weak response, and everyone in the room knew it. William was now reduced to preemptive character assassination of his own staff. Dr. Wells was called to testify immediately. A nervous woman in her 50s, she spoke quietly but clearly about being pressured to change her technical findings.
The recording is authentic, she said simply.
There are no signs of manipulation or editing. I was asked to find problems that don't exist. The revelation transformed the hearing. Committee members who had been swayed by William's presentation now looked at him with open skepticism. The media coverage shifted from questions about Charlotte's credibility to exposés of palace evidence tampering. But William wasn't finished. As Dr. Wells concluded her testimony, he requested permission to make a final statement. Ladies and gentlemen, what we've witnessed today is exactly why palace security protocols exist. Miss Matthews and her allies have orchestrated an elaborate campaign to undermine confidence in our institutions. They have recruited palace staff, manipulated media coverage, and created public pressure designed to force predetermined outcomes. He turned to look directly at Charlotte for the first time. Miss Matthews, you may have convinced yourselves that you're serving some greater good, but you've actually damaged Britain's reputation and undermined the stability of our constitutional system. History will judge you harshly for that. Charlotte felt compelled to respond. Against her lawyer's advice, she requested permission to address William directly. Seals, I never wanted to be in this position. I never wanted to challenge the institution I work for. But when I accidentally heard evidence of systematic fraud, I had to choose between protecting my career and protecting innocent people who were being robbed. She paused, looking around the committee room at the politicians, journalists, and observers who were hanging on every word. You can question my motives, my character, my competence. You can threaten my career and my personal safety, but you can't change what I recorded, and you can't change the fact that money meant for hospitals and schools was stolen while senior officials covered it up. Her voice grew stronger as she continued. History will judge all of us based on what we did when we learned about corruption and suffering. I chose to speak up. You chose to cover it up. I'm comfortable with how that comparison will look to future generations. The committee room was silent for several moments after Charlotte finished speaking. William stared at her with undisguised hatred, but said nothing. The hearings continued for several more hours, with additional witnesses and technical experts. But the pivotal moment had passed. William's credibility was destroyed, and Charlotte's courage had been vindicated. 6 months later, Charlotte watched from the public gallery as William Seals was sentenced to 3 years in prison for obstruction of justice and tampering with evidence. Prince Edward and Lord Pemberton had already pled guilty to conspiracy charges and received suspended sentences in exchange for cooperating with the ongoing charity fraud investigation. The palace had undergone massive reforms, with new oversight systems and transparency requirements that would have been unthinkable before Charlotte's recording became public. Dozens of corrupt charities had been shut down, and millions of pounds in stolen funds had been recovered and redirected to legitimate humanitarian programs. Charlotte had paid a price for her courage. Her career in government communications was over, and she faced ongoing security concerns from William's remaining allies. But she had also discovered reserves of strength and principle she never knew she possessed. Sarah Davidson's newspaper had offered Charlotte a position as an investigative journalist, work that would allow her to continue fighting corruption from a different angle. It wasn't the career she had planned, but it was one she could pursue with complete integrity. As she left the courthouse after William's sentencing, Charlotte reflected on the journey that had brought her to this point. A single accidental recording had changed her life, exposed systematic corruption, and forced institutional reforms that would protect vulnerable people for generations to come. She had learned that the truth was more powerful than she had imagined, but also more dangerous. She had discovered that courage wasn't the absence of fear, but action despite fear. Most importantly, she had proven to herself that doing the right thing was worth any personal cost. The hidden proof was no longer hidden, and justice had finally been served. Charlotte Matthews walked into her uncertain but honest future, carrying the knowledge that when history had demanded a hero, she had found the strength to answer the call.